Hi, welcome. My name is Anna Hallows, and this is my podcast around ambiguous loss. So, this is a space where we take the tangled, complicated business of being human being and we try to make a little bit more sense of it together. I am a marriage and family therapy student. I went back to school after 10 years to finish something that I began 10 years ago. And so my work has lived at the intersection of a few different worlds. So family systems, attachment, trauma research, and also the neuroscience of the nervous system, and also how nature and environments do what they do to human health, especially in the context of loss and grief and attachment and identity formation. So underneath all of that, what my work really comes down to is one thing. It is sitting with people in the most difficult chapters of their life and helping them find a language for what they're experiencing. And that language is what I hope to capture within this podcast. So here is something that we don't say enough. Grief is not only about death. So we tend to treat grief like it has one cause and one shape. You know, someone dies, we mourn, and the culture implies eventually we're done. But so much of what breaks our hearts never involves death at all. And some of it never fully resolves. It just becomes a part of who we are. So today we're talking about one of the most common, most overlooked, and most quietly devastating forms of grief there is, and it's called ambiguous loss. And by the end of our time together, my hope is simple, that you'll have new words for something that you've been carrying wordless for a very long time. So let's begin. What is ambiguous loss? Ambiguous is a loss that remains unclear. There's no confirmation, no resolution, no closure, and often no acknowledgement from the world around you. It's grief without certainty. That's what usually, when there's certainty, that usually allows grief to run its course. When grief is uncertain, there is no course. It is simply unresolvable. The term comes from Dr. Pauline Boss, and in the 1970s, Boss worked with families of pilots who had gone missing in the Vietnam War. So they went missing. They were not confirmed dead. They were just gone. And she noticed something that the grief theories of the time couldn't explain. The families weren't grieving in the tidy stages of grief everyone talked about. They were frozen, suspended, unable to mourn because you can't fully mourn someone who might walk back through the door, and unable to hope freely because they might not. Boss realized the problem wasn't the families. The problem was the situation. The loss itself was ambiguous, and it was the ambiguity, not the weakness in the person, that made it so hard to bear. That was a radical reframe. It moved the pathology out of the person and into the circumstance. She later put it in a line I come back to constantly. The situation is abnormal, not the person. Over the following decades, she expanded the theory well beyond wartime. And it's now a foundational concept in grief and family research. The current understanding in psychology is that ambiguous loss is not a disorder. It's a type of loss defined by uncertainty that produces predictable and understandable distress. So as Boss identified two forms, they're almost mirror images of each other. One form is physical absence with psychological presence. So examples of these are a missing person, a divorce, estrangement, military deployment, immigration, and adoption. The second form is physical presence with psychological absence. And this is in situations such as Alzheimer's disease and dementia, addiction, traumatic brain injury, severe mental illness, and personality change following illness or trauma. So why is this psychologically different than bereavement from ordinary grief? Because ordinary grief, as painful as it is, has a shape. There's a before and an after. There's a fact, a hard, terrible, but clear fact. And clarity, even the clarity of the worst news, gives grief somewhere to go. Ambiguous loss takes that away. There's no fact to organize around, no permission to mourn, because mourning feels like giving up. No permission to hope, because hope keeps getting punctured. And so the person lives in the exhausting middle, grieving and hoping at the same time forever, with no ritual, no ending, and often no one who even recognized that a loss has occurred. That middle place, that's where so much suffering hides. So let's talk about your brain for a minute, because there's a reason ambiguous loss feels so uniquely exhausting. And it's not weakness, it's biology. Here's the big idea. Your brain is a predictable machine. This is a well-established view in neuroscience, and it's often called predictive processing. Your brain is constantly running forecasts. What happens next? What does this mean? Am I safe? And comparing these forecasts against reality. When prediction matches reality, the brain relaxes. When they don't, the brain flags an error and says, pay attention, resolve this, figure it out. Certainty, in other words, is one of the brain's favorite things. Uncertainty is a problem to be resolved, to be solved. Now imagine a situation the brain cannot resolve, a loss with no answer. Is he coming back? Will she remember me tomorrow? Is this the real him, or is this the addiction talking? The prediction machine keeps running, keeps searching, and keeps hitting the same wall. Unknown, unknown, unknown. That unresolved state keeps a low-grade threat response switched on. In short bursts, our stress physiology is brilliant. Cortisol and other stress responses mobilize us to act, but these systems were built for threats that end. You run from the danger, or the danger passes and the system stands down. Ambiguous loss is a threat that never resolves. So the system never fully stands down. That's what we mean by chronic activation. The low hum of stress that never quite switches off, and over time, chronic activation wears on us. It shows up as exhaustion, irritability, trouble sleeping, difficulty concentrating, and emotional dysregulation, feeling flooded or numb or swinging between the two. There's also our attachment system, the deep wired-in drive to stay connected to the people we love and know where they are emotionally and physically. Ambiguous loss is, in a sense, an attack on that system. It keeps the attachment alarm ringing. Where are they? Are they safe? Are they mine? Are they gone? With no answer that lets the alarm turn off. So if you've experienced this and wonder why you're so tired, why you can't just get over it, please hear this. You are not failing. You are a human nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do in a situation it was never built to handle. Ambiguous loss almost never happens to just one person. It happens to a family. And to understand that, I want to borrow from Murray Bowen family systems theory, the work of psychiatrist Murray Bowen, and later teachers like Monica McGoldrick, who mapped how patterns move through generations. Bowen's core insight is that a family is an emotional unit, a system. Pull on one thread and the whole web moves. A few concepts worth knowing is differentiation of self, and that's the ability to stay connected to your family and hold on to your own thinking. Your emotional center without getting swept into everyone else's anxiety. Its opposite is emotional fusion, where individual feelings blur together into one big shared reaction, and no one can tell where they end and the family begins. Under the strain of ambiguous loss, families often fuse. The anxiety is so high that everyone's nervous system starts firing together. And here's a subtle, painful thing. Family members frequently grieve the same ambiguous loss in completely different ways and on different timelines. One sibling wants to move mom into memory care and grieve. Another insists she's still in there. Both are right. Both are grieving, but because they can't tolerate the difference, it becomes conflict. That's where triangles come in. Bowen's idea that when tension between two people gets too high, they pull in a third to stabilize it. In a family facing ambiguous loss, you'll see triangles everywhere. Two family members united in worry about a third, or a child pulled into a tension between two grieving parents. You also see emotional cutoff, managing unbearable anxiety by cutting off contact entirely. It looks like resolution, it isn't. The cutoff is ambiguous loss, often creating a new one on top of the original. And all of this rides on top of chronic anxiety in the system and multi-generational transmission, the reality that how this family handles loss was shaped by how the last family did and the one before that. The grief you're carrying may be partly inherited. The takeaway, if your family is struggling together right now, fighting, fracturing, misunderstanding one another, that's not a sign your family is broken. It's a sign the system is under enormous unrecognized load. So let's go deeper into the attachment piece because it explains why these losses cut so specifically deep. The foundation comes from John Bowlby, who first described attachment as a biological system, and Mary Ainsworth, whose research identified distinct patterns in how we bond. In broad strokes, researchers describe secure attachment, the felt sense that others are reliable and that you are worthy of care. Anxious attachment, a tendency towards fear of abandonment and a need for reassurance. Avoidant attachment, a tendency to protect yourself through distance and self-reliance. Disorganized attachment, often rooted in relationships that were both the source of comfort and of fear, leaving a person pulled toward and away at once. Now, here's why ambiguous loss lands so hard on our attachment systems. Attachment relationships are how we organize our sense of safety in the world. When one of those relationships becomes ambiguous, present but altered, absent but not gone, it destabilizes something foundational. The person who was your secure base is now the source of your uncertainty. For someone with a more anxious pattern, the not knowing can be agonizing. The abandonment fear with no resolution to soothe it. For someone more avoidant, there may be a powerful pull to shut down and declare the person gone just to escape the limbo. And what we call an attachment injury, a moment when someone we depended on wasn't there for us in a way that mattered, becomes almost impossible to repair when the relationship is ambiguous. How do you repair a rupture with someone who can no longer remember it? How do you reconcile with a parent you've had to cut off? That's why unresolved attachment relationships create such particularly painful grief. It isn't only that the person we're losing, it's the safety they represented. It's our sense of a predictable world. Now, here's a piece that I think causes some of the deepest wound, and it isn't the loss itself, it's the loneliness around it. There's a term coined by the grief researcher Kenneth Doka, disenfranchised grief, and it means grief that isn't openly acknowledged, socially supported, or publicly mourned. Grief the world doesn't count. So ambiguous loss is disenfranchised grief in its purest form, and our culture makes it worse in specific ways. We live inside a productivity culture that treats sustained grief as an inconvenience. Take a few days, then get back to work. We're steeped in toxic positivity. The pressure to look on the bright side, to find the silver lining, to be grateful, so people say with real kindness, at least he's still alive. Never realizing they've just told a grieving person their grief isn't allowed. We also have no rituals for this. When someone dies, we know what to do. We gather, we bring food, we say words. But there's no ceremony for the day you realize your mother no longer knows your name. No ritual for finalizing an estrangement, so the loss goes unmarked, and unmarked losses are so much more difficult to metabolize. And then there's misunderstanding by the people closest to us. And here's the thing about invalidation. When you're in pain and you're told your pain isn't real or isn't allowed, you now carry two burdens: the loss and the shame about the loss. The second one is optional, and it's the only one we can start to put down today. Just by naming this out loud, your grief is real. It counts, and even if no one gave you a card. So what helps healing? What does help? And I want to be honest because nothing here makes the ambiguity disappear. The research, Boss and others point somewhere more useful. Not ending the loss, but building a life that has room for it. Now let me walk you through what's evidence informed. First, I want to distinguish healing from closure. Closure says, end it, resolve it, be done. Healing says, carry it differently so it no longer runs you. You are not aiming to stop loving or stop grieving. You're aiming to hold the loss with less agony and more peace. The reframing alone changes everything. Now here's what supports it: meaning making. Not everything happens for a reason, but your meaning, what this shows about your love, your values, what you want to do with it. Emotional validation, naming the grief is real to yourself and to at least one other person. Mindfulness, learning to be in the present moment without needing it resolved, noticing this is hard right now without spiraling into every future unknown. Self-compassion, treating yourself with the tenderness you'd offer a friend in your exact situation. This is not indulgence, it's regulation. It literally calms the stress response we talked about. Therapy. So therapy, especially with someone who understands ambiguous loss, doesn't push you towards false closure. Support groups, being in a room, real or virtual, with people who don't need it explained. The relief is not translating your pain is enormous. Rituals. Since the culture won't give you one, make one. A letter you write and don't send. A candle on a certain day. A walk you take to mark what was. Ritual gives shapeless grief a container. Journaling, getting the both and out of your head and onto a page where you can look at it. Boundaries, deciding how much you can give without erasing yourself. Boundaries are not abandonment. They're what makes it possible to keep showing up sustainably. Acceptance of uncertainty. The hardest and most freeing one is not liking the not knowing, but stopping the exhausting war against it. Boss calls this holding both and. He is gone and he is here. I grieve and I hope. Rebuilding identity. So gently asking, who am I now? And letting a new honest answer form over time. And maintaining hope without denial. Hope that's clear-eyed, not she'll be cured, but there will still be moments of connection and beauty and me. Now, before we go, I want to leave you with a few things, and I want you to carry out the door. Grief is not weakness. It is the receipt of love. You grieve because you loved, and love is not something to apologize for. Ambiguity is difficult because you are human. Because your brain seeks certainty, your body seeks safety, and your heart seeks the people it's bonded to, struggling with the not knowing isn't a flaw in you. It's the most human thing there is. Naming loss in the beginning of healing. So not the end, the beginning. If today you found a name for something you've carried wordless for years, then something has already shifted. You are no longer alone with that unnamed thing. And connection reduces suffering. Every piece of this, the neuroscience, the family systems, the attachment, points to the same direction. We are not built to carry this alone. Reach towards one person who can hold it with you. And we're going to stay in this territory, but turn towards something surprising and hopeful. The research on how nature and the natural world affect a grieving nervous system. Why a walk among trees does something a walk down a hallway can't. I can't wait to explore it with you. Until then, be gentle with yourself, especially with the parts of you that are still waiting for an answer that may not come. Those parts are doing their best, and so are you.